So welcome to our back to school webinar for the 2026-2027 school year. I'm Zoe Calloway, Vice President of Education at Tax Foundation. We're happy to have you join us this evening, whether you're an educator at any level, someone who's joining just for more information for themselves, or someone who's in the professional setting. Thank you. We're happy to have you tonight. And this will be recorded. So the PowerPoint will be presented the whole time. It will be included in the recording as well. We can send out a link later when it is live. And if you don't receive that link eventually, please check the Tax Foundation YouTube account where we will post the recording. All right. I have a few things dropping in the Q&A real quick before we get started. Of course. All right. So let's get into what we're all here for today, this evening, if you're on the East Coast, or this afternoon on the West Coast, or anywhere in between. We really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy schedules to do something that most people probably wouldn't take the time to do, which is to learn more about taxes. So I appreciate you being here with us. So like I mentioned, this is presented by Tax Foundation. And if you're unfamiliar with Tax Foundation and heard about this webinar, we are the world's leading nonpartisan tax policy think tank. We did start in the United States and recently expanded to include an office in Brussels for Tax Foundation Europe. We are nonpartisan and focus all of our work, even the TaxEDU resources, on our 4 principles of sound tax policy. Those are simplicity, neutrality, transparency, and stability. And anything that you're looking for from us, if you're wondering, sometimes it feels like they lean this way and sometimes it feels like they lean that way. It just all boils down to these 4 principles that guide all of our work and have for quite some time. As you can see on the screen, we were founded in 1937. In 2021, Tax Foundation decided to expand their educational efforts beyond just lawmakers and legislative staff to also include the general public and educators. The nature of it is most people could probably stand to learn more about taxes. If you're on this webinar, that's probably no surprise to hear. So I was brought on to start TaxEDU, our educational platform of free resources for anyone at any level looking to learn more about taxes. So if you're not an educator on this call, don't worry, there's resources for you as well. If you are an educator, just a reminder that it is all completely free to use in your classroom. So what does it mean to teach taxes? Why should we teach them? How do we go about it? It seems so daunting. There's so much to cover. And even once you maybe covered it all, if you had the time, it's probably all changed by the time you were able to get it all through to your students. So when we're thinking about teaching taxes in the classroom, whether you're a middle school teacher, high school, college, if you're an adult learner or educator, if you're looking for professional development, these are all times where we can actively learn more about taxes. There is simply just always more to learn. That's the nature of the tax code. And when we're thinking of educating more directly to a middle school, high school, college level education of taxation, the courses we can include them in: econ, obvious, right? The little bit of tax education you may have gotten in school, you probably got in an economics class, but it can be included in other classrooms as well. So the main one in this new, nationwide movement is in personal finance education. If you're not including taxes in your education and classes in this, and not just a standalone lesson in most of your classes around personal finance, you're not truly setting up your students for success. But it goes beyond that as well. Taxes are the main connection between a citizen and their government, so it's important to talk about them in civics courses. Taxes have changed silly things in history all the way through what we just recently celebrated earlier this month with the founding of the United States. It's created nations, it's had revolutions, it's really impactful in very interesting ways. So we can cover taxes in history as well to understand where we came from and the progression to what we have today. Beyond that, business, finance, accounting, public policy, these are all important areas to talk about taxation as well. And we will cover different areas of how and where, why to include them. But at the end of the day, if you're teaching any of these topics, I do highly encourage you to consider where you could add some tax education into your lesson. And why is that important? Why am I advocating for you to introduce your students to these topics wherever you have the chance? Taxes play a huge role, not just in history, like I just mentioned, where we know how impactful they can be, but in our everyday lives as well. So when it comes to personal financial literacy, taxes really play a role in almost everything. If it has to deal with money, it almost certainly has a tax implication. So taxes will come into play for your students in their real life when they graduate through earnings, savings and investment, budgeting, spending, employment decisions, housing decisions, what property do they choose to have, where they might choose to move, and so much more. They really play a bigger role than we might like to consider if, we're only tending to think about taxes during tax filing season. The other reason is that tax literacy is incredibly low in the United States. Probably not surprising. I wouldn't have a job if this wasn't the fact. There's always, new education available. And I, make the joke often. If you've been on a presentation from us before, I'm sorry you've heard this before. But in my generation, the joke online is that we all know that the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, but no one ever taught us how to do our taxes or anything about them. A whole generation is making this joke on the internet. And the real ways that this comes out is that more than half of American taxpayers, regardless of education, income, political affiliation, where they live in the country, age, it didn't really matter, did not have proficient tax knowledge. Most of them did not understand basic tax concepts, like how tax brackets truly work. What's the difference between a tax credit and a tax deduction? These things are very simple things that create the base understanding that we need in order to build new information on top of to succeed as taxpayers, business owners, public policy officials going in the future. This is important education to have. And the fact of the matter is, most people haven't received this yet. The financial literacy movement across the country only started in 2005 in Utah. And currently today, over 20 years later, 30 states have mandated or are in the process of mandating financial literacy graduation requirements for their students. So think of how many people have simply never received this education and are trying to learn as they go. If you've been someone who's trying to learn as you go, probably understand how frustrating that can be when your educational opportunity comes when you're confronted with a tax you weren't expecting. Even though I work at Tax Foundation, this is my job, I'm thinking about taxes, I'm keeping up with tax policy. I myself, when I moved here for this job, was confronted with a tax I wasn't expecting. I thought I'd prepared for the move to Virginia. I thought I'd researched enough and was ready. When I received a property tax bill for my vehicle, that was a shock. I'd never heard of such a thing back home, right? And that had a real impact on my personal finances and financial decision making going forward. That was not the best time for me to learn about a property tax existing for vehicles in the county that I live in. This shouldn't have been shocking information. And if I myself had received more tax literacy education in school and early in adulthood, maybe it wouldn't have been. Maybe I would have been more prepared. Maybe I would have understood why this tax is being levied. And these are just different ways that it plays in. So on this presentation tonight, as we get more into how to talk about taxes in your classroom, keep in mind that you might be the very first point for your students in learning about taxation. That's critical. So we hear from a lot of teachers that the first thing that they do, maybe the only thing that they do with their students about taxes, is sitting them down with a W-2. That's wild. We came up with an analogy today on a conversation in a meeting that this is like trying to build a car and starting with a steering wheel because you're just ready to drive. There's so much that goes into it before we reach that step. So, like I mentioned, we're often learning as we go, but this is really complicated. There's layers of taxes, there's different types of taxes, and they're ever changing. So if we're learning as we go, we're never going to be fully prepared for the reality of taxes, how they work, and the meaning that they have in different forms of education, real practical life, even in current events that are going on. So whether you are teaching, you're learning for yourself this evening, you're a professional looking to learn more to convey to your clients, parent looking to talk to your kids about this, please, with any other type of education, start with the basics. Everything that we learn starts with a base knowledge. So if you are the first contact for who you're talking to and presenting and educating about this, and you're not starting with, what is a tax? What are different types of taxes? Why do we pay them? Sitting them down with a W-2 is like step 20 in the process. They're not going to have the basic knowledge needed to understand things on the form, how it impacts them, why this matters. It's also going to keep them from being fully engaged in the lesson that you're providing. So just keep in mind what would need to be the very first thing that you would want to learn if you're thinking about this. So part of this evening is to educate you as the attendee as well. We want to make sure that the educators who also may not have had this education previously or have been learning as they go have accurate information to provide to their students. So this evening, we're going to kind of go through like what a mock lesson looks like during this presentation itself. And so we will start with the basics. What is a tax? There's different things, that are taxes that have different names. There's user fees and fines, and these are revenue for the government also, but they're not taxes. So it's important to understand the difference here. A tax is a mandatory payment or charge collected by local, state, and national governments. Again, there's layers to this. From individuals or businesses to cover the costs of goods and services that the government provides. And different governments at different levels provide different services, so they levy different taxes. And so anything that you want to take a peek at around you in life, think about the park across the street from your home, the school that your kids attend, the school that you teach in, the infrastructure that you're using to get to work. These are all government services that have been provided to you, the funding of which came from taxes. And this is why it is the main connection between a citizen and their government. It is that direct connection, that social contract that we are remitting this money to you, the government, to provide us with services that we would like to receive. And that's the purpose of a tax. The government is simply not a business. And in order to do these things, they also need money to accomplish them. That money comes from taxpayers through taxes that are levied on us from the different levels of government. So we have some things listed here. And again, different levels of government have different priorities that are funded through taxation, but these are just some examples to name a few. So then when we're thinking about what is a tax, why do we have them? The next question should be, well, who pays them? And especially important right now with, myths and misconceptions on social media, especially with the rise of TikTok and financial influencers that are definitely giving some misinformation to your students, is you might have someone coming on and saying, you don't have to pay your income tax. A 16-year-old might want to believe that and think, just got my first paycheck and that did take a good bit of my money I thought I was going to make. I don't want to pay it. And this person said I didn't have to. So the next point is that they do have to. It is legal. It is codified in law. And so the simple answer is everyone pays taxes in one form or another. Even if you're excited that your state doesn't have a sales tax, they're making up for it another way. So if you're bragging, oh, I live in this place and there's no income tax, it's fantastic. Well, how high is your property tax? These are things to consider because everyone is paying taxes. So next to get into are what are the different types of taxes? Where can we keep an eye out for them when we're navigating through life, when we're trying to educate on the breadth of taxes here? That it's not just an income tax that's coming out of your student's first paycheck. They might encounter taxes in other places. So the three basic tax types that we've identified are taxes on what you earn, on what you buy, and on what you own. We break it up into these three buckets. They're pretty broad, but it's easy to categorize most taxes under these three buckets. But at the end of the day, no matter what bucket it falls into, every dollar you pay starts as a dollar that you've earned as income. The difference here is when it is collected. Income taxes are coming out of your paycheck. Sales taxes, taxes on what you buy, are usually being collected by businesses to be remitted to the government, so it's a little more indirect. And taxes on what you own are also directly collected by the government as well. So this is also important to make sure you're aware of when you might have a tax deadline. Sales tax, it's happening when you make the purchase. You don't really have to think about that in most cases. But when it comes to a property tax, when is the deadline for you to pay that? That's important to keep in mind. When it's an income tax, keeping in mind that this is coming out of your paycheck, who's taking it at what levels, and factoring that in for when it comes to filing season. And if you're not having it taken out of your paycheck, when do you have to remit it for what you've held back to account for the tax that you owe? Next, we can get into levels of taxation. What are they? Why do we pay them? Who pays them? What are the types? who levies them? I think if you're a casual purveyor of the tax system and you really don't tend to think about it as much as people at Tax Foundation probably do, which is far more than the average person would probably like to think about taxes in their daily life, you might really only actively think about federal taxes, right? They get all of the media attention. That's what we're considering when we're doing tax filing season, even though they're not the only taxes happening during tax filing season. There are different levels. They're happening all the time. They're all around you. You have to keep an eye out for all of them. You need to understand changes in all of them and adjust your personal finances accordingly. So when we're teaching taxes and we're talking about the levels, there are federal, state, and local government taxes that again fund different priorities for each of these governments. So when you have on your paycheck that a state income tax has been taken out, and a federal income tax has been taken out, it's important to understand these levels to explain to your students that this is not double taxation. No one's taking your money twice, right? There are two different governments levying two different income taxes to fund separate priorities. Totally legal, totally okay. So understanding these levels helps us to adjust to how to navigate with the taxes around us, but also to understand, how they're really operating and to make sure that we're prepared for them. So federal taxes get a lot of attention, but state taxes tend to have the most direct impact on our daily lives. If you're in a state with a sales tax, any purchase you make almost is going to have a tax placed on it. You can have property taxes from your local government, which might change where you choose to live. Federal taxes are not the end all be all, even though they get the media frenzy. So once we've started with the basics and we've covered that, number one topic that most people are going to want to jump into when they're talking about taxes is income taxes. They're the ones we think about with tax filing. They're the ones we're most actively engaged with and processing, and they're the ones that can have really big impacts on our lives as well. So some of the basics here that I want to cover, just that we've noticed there's some misconceptions that exist kind of broadly, so we can dispel them before you take this into your classroom. First, we start with taxable income. Is all of your income subject to tax? Like some of it, do you even have to pay an income tax? These are different questions that you have. And as more types of income are being created with the digital expansion that we're seeing in our world, it's really important to understand what's taxable and what's not. So certain types of income are taxable, and it differs from your gross income. This is that first paycheck interaction. This is where you can loop in your kids with a real world example. If you're a high school teacher, they're probably starting their first jobs. If you're a college professor, they might also be starting their first jobs. And so this is a great time to say, hey, remember how you were told you'd be making 15 an hour? Do you take home 15 an hour? It's, kind of a jarring experience, right? And I'm sure we can all think back on it of getting that first paycheck, not having the tax education, and thinking, who is FICA and where's all my money going? It's a little shocking, right? And it kind of sours you to taxation. Having this understanding and being prepared for it is helpful for them to navigate. Kids these days are super interested in preparing for their financial future, and it's great to give them the holistic approach to this with tax education. So when you're talking to them about taxable income, one, it's different than gross income. What you're told your salary is, what you're told your hourly rate is not going to be what you take home. And if it is because you're a 1099 employee, make sure that you're holding back taxes to remit during tax filing season, right? So everyone's prepared. You can see here on the screen that there's different income that is included. Often we say tips, but again, where things are ever changing, you may have heard of no tax on tips, no tax on this, no tax on that. That recently changed and it could change again. So it's good to keep up with this stuff because some income that may have been taxed 2 years ago might not be taxed today. Freelancing, income from rental properties, retirement plan payouts, unemployment benefits. If they win the lottery, if they win a scratch off ticket, that's also taxable income. So all of this goes under what is happening in filing season. What is that number that the government is saying is your taxable income? If it's not all there, making sure that you're reporting on all of it when you file. So your filing status also impacts this. If you're a single filer, married, head of household, married filing jointly, this all changes your taxable income as well. So as we can see, even with something as basic as how much of your income is getting taxed also has a lot of layers to it. Next, when it comes to thinking about income taxes, this is probably the biggest misconception that we have encountered. No judgment if this is one held by anyone on the webinar. This is why we're here this evening. But just to make sure that we're all good, all on the same page and prepped for this, we're going to pose a question that we had in our National Tax Literacy Poll from 2024, of which over 60% of respondents answered incorrectly. And this has a direct impact. I'll get into the story after we play a video coming up. But here's the question. Suppose your income places you in the 22% bracket. How much of your income do you think is taxed at the rate of 22%? Just some of it or all of it? So when we're talking about our, bracket are we in, this is how we talk about it. You're in the 22% bracket, right? All right. Now you've had time to think on it. I'm going to play a video as an example of some of our free resources that are available for you to show in your classroom to see how easy it can be to distill complicated topics like this, a graduated rate income tax structure that we have federally and in many states, to your students.
Pop quiz. Do you know what tax bracket you're in? If you answered it depends, well, you're right, because parts of your income are probably taxed at different rates. Say you have $50,000 in taxable income. Today, that dollar amount lands within the 22% bracket. But that doesn't mean you pay that rate on the full $50,000. Let's explain. In the US, your federal income tax is calculated through a progressive, graduated rate system. Basically, if you make more, you're taxed more. Right now, we have 7 tax brackets. Each bracket covers a range of taxable income, and the rate for each bracket gets progressively higher. Any income within the range of the first bracket is taxed at that rate. The next dollar you earn over the first bracket falls into the second bracket, and only those additional dollars within that range are taxed at the new rate. This continues as your taxable income increases. So in our $50,000 example, this much gets taxed at 10%, only this much gets taxed at 12%, and only this much gets taxed at 22%. As you can see, whatever your top tax rate is, it doesn't apply to all of your taxable income, just the portion that falls into your highest bracket. When we understand how brackets work, we can better understand the tax impact of picking up a second job, putting in overtime, or any other ways we might increase our income.
So why this is important? A real world example here. I have a friend who is fantastically smart. She teaches AP Calculus for high school students. If you're a teacher, that's, you probably understand that that's maybe not anyone's favorite thing to go in and teach. On the day she got a promotion, which was the day we started production of this video, she contacted me panicking, obviously, because I work at Tax Foundation. I got a raise. It's wonderful. It has moved me up into a bracket, and now I'm going to lose money from making more money from my promotion. How could they do this to me? She just started spiraling. I'm going to have to quit my job. I'm going to have to go to this other school. Why do taxes work like this? This is awful. She almost quit her job because of a promotion. Luckily, we were friends. I was able to explain, hey, that's not how that works. Take your promotion. You'll be okay. You will not lose money. That is not how a tax bracket works. Not all of your income is now being taxed at 22%. You're totally good. And that was a real education moment there. And you can see how life-changing it can be sometimes to understand or not understand how taxes work. Because if you think it means that you're going to make less money from a promotion, would you want to take it? Probably not. So when we're talking about brackets, the video gives you the basic example explaining how they work. When we're thinking about this in real brackets, which we have here on the screen. So you can see 2026, these are the ones that apply this year to the paychecks you were earning this year that will be filed next tax filing season in 2027. You can see the ranges here and how only those portions of income will be taxed at the corresponding rate next to them. So then when you're, presented with your tax brackets, and also these change every year, again, ever changing. So you want to keep keeping up with it. Every year when you go to check this and see how much you're paying for your income tax, you'll be able to check and calculate more accurately how much you will actually owe, which is your actual tax burden. So how much they take is a different story that we'll get into, but this is how much you will owe because of your income tax. So this is really important to understand. I wanted to put real brackets up on the screen just so you can see from the video to real world, this is what it looks like. I highly encourage to do this in the classroom as well. It's always good to make that connection. It's one thing to show the concept in the video, have that moment of clarity. Okay, it's not all taxed at one rate. What does that look like in practice? This is what this looks like. This is how you can look at a chart with a lot of numbers on it and figure out what your tax burden is. But does your refund represent your burden? So I just said, what's in those brackets is your burden. But some people will say, I got a bigger refund this year. It's great. My taxes went down, whatever. I owe money. Oh, my taxes went up. This is awful. But that's not exactly how that works. Your tax refund doesn't necessarily represent your tax burden. It more so represents if you withheld accurately from your paycheck, which you do have full control over. So there are withholding tables with your employer where you go in and select how much you're withholding. So if you receive a refund, it just means that you over withheld on your taxes. You paid more to the government than you actually owed them, your burden. If you owe money one year, it means you underpaid them and you weren't withholding enough from your paycheck, and then you owe the difference. It is incredibly difficult to zero it out. So don't get too excited about, I'm going to figure this out. I'm going to be a pro. I'm never going to owe anything. It's going to be great. The head of our federal team, who, is a genius of taxes, she's phenomenal, has tried. And she has told me that she has never gotten it exactly even. It's just too complicated. So in teaching any of this, definitely tell your students too, like, I know this feels like a lot. It is. I know it feels complicated. It is, but it's okay. We're here to learn about it. So just to rethink your refunds, I know tax season is over for this year. It will come again. It always comes again. But if you're owing every year, just understand that that's a withholding problem and not a tax burden problem. Connecting this to the real world, as you should in your classroom when you're moving through different tax topics. Earlier in the year, we were hearing in the media about people getting refunds that were bigger by about $1,000 on average this year. And people are saying, yay, our tax burden went down, my taxes were cut. In that instance, there was a tax cut, but that's not what caused the refund. The media didn't really explain this, right? But in the tax policy and practice side of things, what resulted in the refund is that the federal withholding tables weren't updated along with the tax cut. So when taxes were reduced and the withholding stayed the same, people were over withholding, resulting in bigger refunds. So just understanding this also helps us navigate through what's happening in Congress or at our state level as well, beyond just our personal finances. So we've gone through how to layer talking about taxes in a good order that sets your students, your kids, yourself up for a better understanding. But what does it look like to take this in practice and build a lesson? First and foremost, you should plug and play this information into any course that might have a tax implication. That's my number one recommendation, especially if you are a personal finance educator. If you are talking about budgeting, income, saving, investing, purchasing power, taxes should be included in those lessons. If you have the opportunity to have a full tax lesson with your students or present this to your children, there's different ways to do this. Again, start with the basics on whatever topic you're working on and work your way up. That previous education simply doesn't exist. So personal finance, where can we include this? Like I said, should be in most lessons, or you're not setting your students up for success. In civics, use it as an opportunity to talk about how citizens are connected to their government, how this has looked like for governments and civilizations for 3,000 years, and how this has influenced where we've come today. Economics and public policy, you can talk about the impacts of taxes on consumer behavior. What does this mean? How do different tax designs matter? It's not just, what tax it is and the impact it has. It's the play between the tax rate and the tax base that also can change the impact. That could be a whole lesson on talking about tax implications for the economy, the personal level, all the way up to the global level. And history, tax has been around for a really long time. If you were hopeful in this call tonight that I was going to tell you that they were going away soon, you'll have to abandon that hope. They've been around for basically forever. They're not going anywhere. And so it's fun and engaging to hook your students in any type of lesson where you're talking about taxes with a fun, silly story from history, like the Rosetta Stone was mainly a tax document, or talk about the beard tax in Russia. It's interesting stuff like this where it is a little silly and might get a chuckle out of your students, but at least maybe you won't get a groan that you're telling them you're starting with a tax lesson that day. And then there's huge implications. There's the French and American revolutions that had lasting impacts in these countries and in broader situations for civilization going forward. So, in all of this, please consider where you might plug in tax lessons in order to just gradually build this knowledge for your students, for your kids, for yourself. When you're doing this, again, all of our resources are completely free to you to use. We encourage you to take them and run with them. They will always be free. I think everyone should learn more about taxes at any age. So we have educational explainer videos like the one that you saw earlier. Our best resource for yourself, for your classroom, if you only have 2 minutes to talk about a tax, probably the glossary terms, over 115 terms related to taxes. We have our short form blog series. We have in-class and take-home reading materials, the deduction podcast, which mainly dives into current events, but great opportunity, especially if you're a university level public policy educator and talking about real policy implications and what it looks like for policy design. Fantastic resource for that as well. So there's all this stuff that you can take and put together into your tax lesson for your classroom. You know better than anyone what your students need. I can't fully prescribe that to you. But if you wanted me to, we did recently launch ready to use lessons called lesson modules on the website. This is something teachers have been asking us for. We had lesson plans for a bit that were built with Common Core standards for grades 9 through 12. We took those down because we didn't want someone who was 74 looking to learn more about taxes and seeing that and saying, this is for high schoolers, it's not for me. This is truly for everyone. So we revamped this. It's basically constructed like a lesson plan. It is a full lesson, essential questions that are answered at the bottom and the key takeaways, and everything that you would need under that topic, all resources, all definitions, all explanations included on this page for you. The only thing it doesn't have is an assessment. Again, it's your classroom. You know your students better than we do. We don't know what level you're taking it to teach at. You might include something else that you want to quiz on. It's the only thing that is not making this a complete lesson that we're offering, but again, completely free. So far, we have one. We started with the basics, as you should as well in your classroom. We have two more that'll come out by the end of the year, and we are really happy to launch this because, again, teachers have been asking for a complete lesson because the main question we get is, I mean, where do we start? This is where you start. So ready to go if you have a full lesson. We have a full course for you here. Going beyond the lesson, and this is for you as taxpayers, also for in your class, it's important to keep up with current tax events, weave them into the instruction that you're giving to have students understand what's happening around them. So we have information from our wonderful policy teams who are the experts in the tax policy landscape on changes from the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, or if you've heard OBBBA, OB3, OBBBA, it's called all of these things. If you've heard any of that in the media, we have tons of analysis, distributional economic effects run through our model from that policy, any changes that you need to keep up with and how they impact your personal taxation. That's on the website as well. Tariffs, oh my goodness, all we hear about is tariffs for the past year, right? Tariffs are taxes too. So we have information on tariffs, how do they work, all of the changes that are also just happening and happening and happening. It's hard to keep up with. We have a tracker on our website that also includes the distributional effects of the tariff policies. And then when we get into state policy, you can see here on the screen, we have a fantastic map from our state team on individual income tax rates. We have these types of maps for about 20 to 30 different state tax types on our website. They're updated annually. On the website, they're also interactive. So if you hover over your state, it will show you the rate. You can also go state by state for where you're specifically located. If you're teaching in Alabama, you want to select Alabama, see all the tax rates for your state, how they've changed, the rankings in our state tax policy index. That's all right there for you, for yourself and for your classroom. And again, all this is for you too. So as you're also keeping up with an ever-changing tax code, it's all here in one place. So we have the state tax maps. I think that's great for keeping up what's going on in your state. I mean, things change all the time. We also have updated information for tax brackets as they're released from the IRS. We also include the changes on our website. So brackets, changes to standard deduction, child tax credits, those change every year as well. We have all of that information on the website too. And if you want to understand, should I take this credit or this deduction? What's the value between them? We have that information as well, and so much more. So anything you're looking to learn about, these are all created with the leaders in the tax policy field in the world. So I want to open it up to questions here. I know there's other topics that sometimes we include in these sessions that weren't included tonight. The main thing was walking through how to work through the process of teaching about taxes. As you drop some things in the Q&A box, I'm going to answer questions submitted by our attendees this evening. So the first one, which is one that we do sometimes cover in a presentation, but did not this evening, is the difference between a tax rate and a tax base. We have a video coming out on this in August. We will be putting that on our social media, sending it out in our newsletter. But this is really important because often when we think about taxes, we're only thinking about the rate, the percentage that the tax is, right? Even when I'm showing you the brackets, you're seeing and thinking of what's the rate? What's my rate? How much am I paying? The other half of it is the tax base. How much is being taxed? And this also changes the economic impacts, the ability for the government to raise revenue, and they work together. If you have a narrow base, you need a high rate to make up for that, because if less things are being taxed, that's less revenue, resulting in the need for higher rate, paying more on individual items. This can have, disproportionate impacts on different taxpayers. There's a broad base where more things are subject to the tax, coupled with a lower rate, can still generate the same amount of revenue, have less of a burden on the economy, and less of a, disproportionate impact on different taxpayers. So these are two different things that work together in design. And so I think that's important to think about. Encourage you to check out the video when it comes out that explains it a little more fun way with an animated visual. But thank you for submitting that question. I think that's fantastic. The next one that we had was young people are no longer seeing an actual paycheck. So how are we supposed to make them aware of the taxes that are being taken out if they just see money being deposited into their account? Well, first, definitely let your students know that you can almost always go see your paycheck online. So if you're talking to them about taxes that are being taken out of a paycheck, walk them through it. They do still have access to this. You're right. It's not as in your face as it was when we had our first jobs and there was a physical check that we got and we could see line by line while also seeing how much we got paid and put two and two together. It's still important to make these connections and talk about different taxes that are coming out. So we talked about this a little bit earlier too. I think it's important to explain the difference between the state and the federal taxes being taken out. It's important to talk about how payroll taxes are split between the employee and the employer, things like this. So anything that's a line item on there, explain it. What does it mean? What does it fund? Why is this being taken out of their paycheck? Connect it to what they can see around them that it's funding. That helps a little bit for them to understand why they're not getting paid the rate they told they were going to be. Next one here is real world tax scenarios in the classroom without jargon. Man, that's my whole job. So I work with very, very smart people, but there is so much jargon in the tax world. Even just when I'm trying to explain here on this webinar, the One Big Beautiful Bill Act and the 5 different names that it has, if you've heard any of them, that's just one example. Everything's an acronym, everything is an economic term. And, most people who don't operate in this world are not going to know what you were talking about if you come in and you start talking like that. If you come in and you say credits and deductions, let's talk about CTC. How are they supposed to know what CTC is? So definitely don't use acronyms for anything. Say the full term that you were talking about and define it. When you first introduce it, define it immediately. That way that they understand right away what we're talking about and building off of it. So when we're bringing in real world tax scenarios, the first example I'll give is tariffs, right? They're all around. Everyone has heard about tariffs. You can see their impact when you're walking into a store and you're seeing prices going up. In some clothing stores, you've noticed over the past year, there's not even a price tag on the items anymore. They stopped doing it because they couldn't keep up with the ever-changing prices that were going on. So Sometimes you don't even know what the item costs until you get to the register because of tariffs. These are real world impacts. But when you're talking about this in your classroom, what you would say is, hey, we've heard about tariffs. Have you heard about tariffs? Raise your hand, engage the students, maybe ask them, what do you think tariffs are? Can you try to explain a tariff to me? Let them talk about it for a little bit and then go into, did you know tariffs are taxes too? But who are they a tax on? Tariffs are a tax on domestic consumers. They bear the burden of the tax. That is the economic implication of tariffs. And are they a stable source of government revenue? This helps them identify things that they're hearing in the media and understand what's fact, what's fiction, and move appropriately. Maybe that's a complicated example to use, but that has been such a big one that most people would have heard about. I wanted to use that one for this. Main thing is just define, define, define. There is so much jargon, but you don't have to use it. There's always a simple way to say what you're saying about taxes and use the examples. I mean, if your students go and shop at Target, you can say, hey, did you notice when you went in, there's no price tag, like price on the price tag anymore? Did you know that that's a tariff implication? Get them engaged in this, get them thinking about it, have them share other ways that they may have seen implications around them from a tax policy, and then talk about, the basics of it, how it works, who pays it, and why. That's really the whole of any tax topic that you want to cover. Next, what do students need to know who will go directly into the workforce? I think this is the same for any tax, education that you're providing. Eventually, they're going to be employees, no matter what field they go into. Um, they can be making a ton of money, they can be making a little bit of money, they can move and make money somewhere else than where they're living now, and you're talking to them about the taxes in their current state. At the end of the day, the principles are the same. So I think there's not necessarily more that you need to share with students who are not going to pursue higher education after high school and are going to go directly into the workforce. Just make sure that they understand where they will encounter taxes, why they're paying them, what they fund, and the basics around income taxes. That's the best way to prepare them. Once you've set that baseline for them, as they start to encounter more tax information and seek out, hopefully, their own tax education beyond that, it'll be easier for them to digest it because you'll have provided this basic information to start with. And then finally, for submitted questions, we have how to engage students in tax conversations. That's a great one. I started this webinar with saying thanks for joining because most normal people probably wouldn't want to spend their time talking about taxes, right? It's not really going to be different for most of your students. Taxes don't tend to get people fired up unless you came and visited the tax foundation office. You would definitely see a different scenario there. But for the average person, we're thinking about it during tax filing season. They make us groan. Like, why do we have to pay them? I wish I just made my whole paycheck. It's so annoying. They're too complicated to keep up with. I don't know, how to prepare myself. And that causes us to shut down, right? Money creates feelings in us, whether we understand what's going on or not. There's feelings with money. I understand when I receive a tax rebate from my state that it's maybe not great tax policy, but it feels good to get a $200 check in the mail, right? So we're always balancing these things. So you're trying to overcome negative feelings around this topic or a natural disinterest in this topic, right? That's why we really propose, starting with direct real world examples, having them share stories of where they've encountered taxes in their life and, just off the dome. What are we thinking about this? Why do you think you encountered it? Do you think it's fair? What does this fund? And open up a dialogue with them, get them engaged, connect it to their life. That's one great way to do it. If you can connect it to their real life, I think it's really important. And the long-term benefit for using that avenue is that you can say they're always going to connect to your real life. So it's good to start now with identifying where we see them and talk about them and really emphasize like there's a lot to learn here. And, understanding taxes can set you up for financial success. That'll perk their ears up, right? But then there's the fun ways to engage. If you're teaching middle school, that might not be the avenue to take, of just the fun stories. We have, a video on the weird ways taxes impact behavior that covers the beer tax, the chicken tax, which only slightly has to do with chickens, but more so how it impacted the automobile industry in the United States. It's just weird. And certain states have really weird taxes. If you live in Arizona, talking about how ice cubes aren't taxed, but a block of ice is, like, there's just interesting things, right? And pinpointing this, get a little chuckle out of your students, have them discuss that, and then diving into a tax lesson, I think is a great way too. There's always something interesting about taxes, some more so to some people and less to others. But again, you know your students better than I do. So whatever you've noticed has been engaging for them, find a way that taxes kind of play into that. I'm going to go into the Q&A now. Thank you for dropping questions in the chat. I'm very happy to see that we have engaged participants this evening. Sample tax returns to demonstrate the concepts. This is something that we would eventually like to release. Because of our filing as an organization, we have to make sure that it's posted in the correct way so that it's legally up. But if you are to, and again, this is step 20, you should not start a tax lesson for the first time with your students with a tax return or W-2. But if you started with the basics and you've worked up in an income tax lesson to demonstrating with a tax form, define it. What is withholding? What is this credit or deduction? What is your taxable income? What is your after-tax income? What is your adjusted gross income? Define all of the terms on that sheet so that they understand what they're looking at. There's a lot on a tax form, right? It's overwhelming to look at. And having them just sit down and fill out box by box by box by hand, which is also not what they're going to do in the real world, right? That's not really how that works anymore. Just defining the stuff so that they're prepared and understand what is on the form and how the different tax concepts interact with each other is going to help prepare them for success. Where do we find this material? This is on taxfoundation.org/taxedu. So everything is there under the education tab, completely for free. Like I mentioned, we're very happy to provide this. But yeah, so you can navigate there to find it. We also have a newsletter. We don't bombard you. It goes out once a month where we share new resources that we have, and it is all posted on our social media accounts as well. Yes, you can absolutely use the materials in Canvas or other platforms. Like I said, they are free and ready to use, and we want you to use them. Everyone could use this education. The presentation will be shared out as a video on our YouTube account. That is Tax Foundation on YouTube. We will also see if we can send this out as a link to registrants after it's been posted as well, so you can keep up. And getting a program in your local schools. So tax literacy is just part of broader financial literacy. There's a whole movement nationwide on this. Next Gen Personal Finance does a lot of the work on that. We're co-partnered with them under the Jumpstart Coalition for Personal Financial Literacy. So you can check out their stuff. They have a live dashboard of what's going on in states. And if it's something that you'd like to pursue and advocate for, I encourage you to take it and run with it. It's education we could all use. All right, we're coming to the end of our presentation this evening, so I just want to take a moment again to thank you for taking time out of your afternoon, your evening, to join us and learn more about taxes. I hope you feel prepared and invigorated to take this into your classroom, to talk to your kids about it for your own personal finances as you're navigating taxes all around you. And again, it's changing all of the time. So if you hear something is going on at the state level or the federal level, please check out information on taxfoundation.org or taxfoundation.org/taxedu to keep up with what's happening with your taxes. I hope you all have a great evening and feel prepared to advance tax literacy. Have a good one.